Oh, I already have it written down.
You already have that written down. Voting behavior. All right. We're going to look at different demographics. And now, guys, stop it. There's going to be some generalizations here. Okay, not stereotypes, but generalizations. As you guys know, not all pious Catholics are Republicans, right? Okay, but when we start talking about religion and politics, one of the things we'll talk about is the more religious you are, the more Republican you tend to be. Now, that is a generalization. Yes? Okay, so there are always exceptions. Yes? Okay, now, so we're going to start with income and occupation. Okay, income and occupation. Okay, now Donald Trump threw a wrench into a bunch of this stuff. Okay, just to tell you, some things, they change over time. Okay, now, like the South. Yes, now, income and occupation. The more income you have, the more education you have. Or like the higher education you have. You tend to be more Republican, the higher income you have. Okay, Republicans used to be known as kind of the white collar crowd. You understand? Now, when you go back to Nixon and you go back to Reagan, both of those Republican presidents won 49 of 50 states. Yeah, I know that's hard to fathom today. That was 72 and 84. Republican president won 49 states. Okay, so obviously, guys, you had a lot of blue collar, or what they called back at the time, Nixon Democrats and Reagan Democrats. Okay, and with Trump in 2016, you had Trump Democrats. A lot of Democrats voted for Trump. That's how he won. Okay, now, so obviously, guys, academia, highly educated people tend to be what? Very liberal. Yes? Okay, like on college campus, people with doctorates and stuff like that. You follow me? Okay? Heavily Democratic. But generally, the higher education you have means the higher income you have. Yes? Which would tend you towards the Republican Party. Things like taxes. You understand? Okay? Let's talk about gender. Now, I'm only going to mention two genders here today. Male and female. Okay, now obviously women didn't have the right to vote until 1920. So we can only look from 1920. And we look from 1920 to 1980. The difference between men and women voting Republican or Democrat was fairly evenly split. Okay, there was no like women voted more one party or the other. Okay. But between 1980 and 2020, we start to see women voting slightly more Democratic than Republican. Okay, big difference here with women. Married women tend to vote more Republican. Single women vote heavily Democratic. So therefore, a slight majority of women going towards the Democrats, if that makes sense. Did that make sense?
It is.
Okay. Age. Under 30. Democrat. Tend to vote with your feelings, not your pocketbook. Okay? Because usually, it's after your 30s that you get into your peak earning years. Okay? And so people between the ages of 30 and 65 tend to vote more what? Republican. Again, looking after your own self-interest when it comes to taxes and so forth. Okay? Those are your family, raising family years and so forth. Over 65, it depends generally on income. So if you're somebody that has saved a lot of money for retirement, okay, you don't rely on Social Security for your subsistence or Medicare for your subsistence, you tend to be more Republican. If you are somebody that lives on a fixed income over the age of 65, you're going to tend to be more Democratic. Does that make sense? Religion. Now, prior to the 1980s, Protestants were more Republican and Catholics were more Democrat. So if you talk to your great-grandparents or grandparents, chances are if they're Catholic, they were a Democrat. They may still be. But since 1980s, more Catholics have moved to the Republican Party. Okay? And same thing with the South. Okay, and those were mostly over social issues like abortion. Catholics didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left the Catholics. Does that make sense? And the South. They left the South. I mean, that's the Bible Belt. Southern Baptists. Okay. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, and I don't want to add any fuel to any fires, but Southern Baptists and Catholics don't have a very good history together. I don't know if you knew that. Okay. My sister's a Southern Baptist. Okay. And as I told my sister, because I've been teaching in a Catholic school for 23 years. Okay. Catholics and Southern Baptists have a heck of a lot more in common than they don't have in common. Okay, the whole thing's silly. All right, so just people need to get over it. All right. Now today, regardless of denomination, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, the more religious you are, the more Republican you tend to be. So Catholics who go to Mass weekly tend to be more Republican. Okay. Now, of course, guys, there are exceptions, as I said. Yes? Okay. One of my best friends, Tom O'Connor, guy teaches over at Northwest Government. His sister is a sister. She's a nun. Okay. And she's one of the most liberal people you'll ever meet. Okay. Insanely liberal, Tom will tell you. Okay. So, obviously, there's exceptions there. But if you talk to Sister Mary Monica, she's pretty conservative. She taught government for 1 year here. So she got her degree, so she got to teach government. Kind of held her hand through that, but she did a good job. Ethnicity. Okay, so when we say ethnic groups, obviously we're talking about non-whites. Okay, now guys, again, it depends. Okay, on where you're from, who you are as an ethnic group. Okay, so let's talk about African Americans. Heavily Democratic, yes? Now, Trump actually outperformed Bush, Romney, McCain, previous Republican presidents. Okay? The African Americans, we learned about this in history. African Americans really moved to the Democratic Party during the New Deal, like Catholics did. Okay? Because of the social justice stuff and the New Deal just helping people. Okay, and African Americans were very much helped by the New Deal. Okay, and they've stayed with the Democratic Party. It's almost monolithic. I mean, you've had elections where over 90% of African Americans have voted Democratic. Okay, Trump did better with African American men and nearly got to 20%, which is high for a Republican. Okay. in this last election. He didn't do as well with African American women. Hispanics. Now, there's a divide here, okay? Part of that, in the United States, we refer to Hispanics, could be somebody from Mexico, could be from Central America, could be Cuban Americans, Puerto Rican Americans, okay? I don't know if it's fair to lump everybody together or not, but generally that's what they do with polling. Cuban Americans tend to be heavily Republican. Where do they come from? They come from a communist country. They fled a communist country. So policies that mirror communism, like socialism, are an affront to Cuban Americans. Okay? Heavy Cuban American population in Florida. They're a very important block of the voting population, as are Puerto Ricans in Florida. Okay? Puerto Ricans, like I mentioned before, they're kind of divided, but lean a little bit more Democrat. When it comes to Mexican Americans, again, lean more to the Democratic, more in the tune of 65-35, 70-30. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this, because of a lot of our Mexican Americans are Catholic, obviously, yes? Okay, so I think for the Republican Party, they definitely have to do a better job of reaching out to Hispanic voters. Okay, it's the fastest growing demographic in the United States. And if you're gonna continue to win national elections, you're gonna have to get Hispanics to vote for you. Okay, and so I think the message, the religious message or family values message, is one that would resonate with a lot of Hispanic families. Okay, and maybe even the economic message. Okay, so as far as entrepreneurship goes, hard work and that sort of thing. Okay, Jews are divided often among economic lines. So with more affluent Jews tend to be more Republican, and lower class Jews would tend to be more Democratic, which kind of follows the population as a whole. But again, there are exceptions to there. Okay, Asian Americans. Again, it depends on where you're from. So, like if you're from Vietnam, their families have generally fled what? Communism. Okay, so again, there you may see a leaning towards the Republican Party with Asian Americans there. But I mean, we have Asian Americans from all over the place. India, you have people from China, you have people from Japan, Korea, and so forth. And there's no clear cut, like other ethnicities, Asian Americans as a bloc vote a little bit more Democratic than Republican. You guys know what ethnic group in the United States as a group has the highest standard of living than any other, including whites? What ethnic group is the most well off in the United States of America? Number one, Indian Americans. Well, yeah, engineering. Okay, then number two, not whites again, Asian Americans. Number three, whites. Okay. Now, obviously, there's more whites than anybody else, so you're going to have upper class and lower class, so you're going to mix that all together. Okay. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Okay, to look at. The last one with voting behavior here is geography. It must be something in the water. Okay, so you got the left coast over here, right? It's very heavily Democratic, yes. The East Coast, especially up here in the North Atlantic states, something in the water, okay? And then the Great Lakes tend to be a little bit more Democratic as well, okay? Now, it must be the reflection off the beaches or something down here that makes more Republicans. I'm not sure. But, yeah, so geography, obviously you have what really is known as the Bible Belt here, okay? The Rust Belt here, which is generally pretty Democratic. Trump really tapped into that. Won states like Pennsylvania, obviously Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. That was the first time around, okay? He didn't win those states the second time around, okay? Texas is, it's pretty red, but a lot of people are fleeing these blue states to go to Texas to find work. Okay, they're gaining population. They have signs, billboards in Texas. If you're moving here to Texas, welcome to Texas. Don't bring your politics with you from where you left. Don't turn our state into what you fled from. Okay. I mean, Texas has got it going, man. They got it going economically. Okay? There's so many jobs being created in Texas. They have no state income tax. Okay? It's cheaper to live there in that case. Okay? Now, I don't want to live in Texas, personally. It's too freaking hot. Okay? It's hot. And there's too much traffic. Dallas and Houston are massive. And then in the middle of the state, you have the liberal utopia known as Austin. Okay, it's like Lawrence in Kansas, right? It's a little liberal utopia, Austin, Texas. Okay, so if you can move there, okay, if you're liberal and fit in Texas. Okay, all right, so good. Kind of got a general idea, just kind of demographically how people vote. As I said, Trump kind of threw a monkey wrench into some of that, like Reagan and Nixon did in previous elections, okay? And if you look at some of the policies of today, and you look at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, okay, the Democratic Party is starting to become more of the party of the elites, okay? And Trump really kind of tried to move the Republican more down to the blue-collar people, talking about issues about trade and manufacturing and stuff like that, that give, people good paying jobs here, okay, in the United States rather than shipping those jobs overseas. All right. So it's an interesting dynamic to follow, not being political here, but just watching how these parties kind of morph over time. And when I show you the two videos next week, okay, we'll watch them back-to-back days. You'll be able to watch that and how the parties kind of repeat themselves and historically, even in a short period of time. All right. So next thing I want to talk about, new header. Okay. And we're getting pretty close here, guys, on finishing the notes. Okay. But I do have some other activities planned, like those two videos, and then a day on, I talked about television commercials that we'll watch on political commercials and so forth. That's a pretty fun day. Okay. So let's talk about polling. Polling. You guys all seen opinion polls, right? Hey, we were in history last semester during the election, right? Did I show you the website realclearpolitics.com in history class, or did I just not have time to do that? Okay. Let me pull it up here. This is a website that political observers of all stripes, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, everybody looks at to see, who's going to win these elections. Okay. And it can be local elections, it can be statewide elections, it can be national elections, and so forth. And this is a pretty good website. And when you talk about bias, media bias, and stuff like that, Real Clear tries to give you both sides. They don't produce a lot of content themselves, but the content they put on their website is more focused on, so you can see liberal and conservative points of view on their website. They're not their points of view, not Real Clear Politics points of view. So you've got some liberal organizations like the Atlantic, Politico, Town Hall's liberal. No, actually, Town Hall's conservative. Washington Times conservative, New Yorker liberal, USA Today liberal. And then, you know, if you know any of these names, I mean, this is Mike Pence, right? Donna Brazile, she's a Democrat. Larry Elder's a conservative. And so you can kind of know what, as you get better at this. Okay, so at the top of this page, okay, they have polls. Okay, latest polls. Now, since we're not really nearing an election, we're looking at approval ratings. Okay, so like you look at President Biden's approval rating. Rasmussen is a polling organization. Okay, this is a group that does a lot of polling near election time, but they also do polling throughout the normal calendar year. This shows an approval rating of 50% of President Biden. This poll down here done by Reuters. I don't know if you guys heard of Reuters. Reuters is an international news organization. Okay, 56-37. That's got him plus 19. You got these different ones in here. Okay, The Economist 52-42, and then they look at direction of the country. Okay, we're on the right track, wrong track. How do you know whether to trust these polls? Okay, and so what we're going to look at, and I'm going to teach you this. Okay, how do you distinguish between a good poll, something you can trust, and one you can't trust? Okay, so I'm going to give you some characteristics of a good poll. Characteristics of a good poll. And one of my favorite classes in college, besides business law, was statistics. Now, I'm not a math guy at all. You know what I mean? Like, it gives me a headache. It actually makes me feel uncomfortable. But statistics was my favorite math class I ever took. Okay, and any of you guys that are going into business, you'll take a stats class. Okay, and because it's practical. Statistics is practical. You can use that information. Okay, where algebra, I'm sure you can use it. I just don't know how you would use it. My wife says she uses it all the time. Geography, or not geography, I can't even say the word. Geometry, I'm sure you would use in like construction and stuff like that, you know. I don't know how you would use it, but I'm sure you do. Okay, so, but stats with polling is pretty important. Okay. With a good characteristic of a poll is it should be truly random, where every segment of the population has an equal chance of being polled or asked a question. It needs to be truly random. That is very difficult to achieve today. How many of you at your home, your house, only have these? No landline. You have no landline, like phone at your house, just cell phone.
I have like a cell phone that is like a landline.
Oh, well, that's cool.
That's what I don't know.
All right.
Maybe it's that.
Okay. How many of you still have a landline? Okay. So cell phones, are they in the phone books? No. Okay. So when I was taking business marketing in college, I had to do a poll where I would just go into the phone book and pick names randomly. Okay, and call those people and ask them to take a survey. Okay, how many people do you think I had to call? Now this is before caller ID and before answering machines. Answering machines might have they were just starting to come into being. They used a cassette tape for it though. Okay, I still have this old cassette tape from college. It was an answering machine cassette tape, a little small. You guys know what cassette tape is?
Yes. They're not that far.
Yeah, they look like this.
Yeah.
All right. I actually have a cassette recorder and cassette tapes.
My old car had
If
a
anybody,
cassette player.
well, you're not doing history. Those of you that are in history this semester, you need this for your interview. Yeah. All right. What was I talking about? Yeah. So, how many people do I have to call to get, say 30 people to answer the survey. A lot. Now today with caller ID, and a lot of people's phone numbers not even being in the phone book, your chances of doing a random poll are diminished. So right off the bat, that's a strike against a lot of these, okay? Another, just some factors, I was just kind of talking about this. This really affected the polls in 1948. I talked about how everybody thought Dewey was going to defeat Truman in 48. And the West Coast, we talked about the time zone fallout was one of the things we talked about. In 1948, people had phones. But really, it was kind of expensive to have a phone. So who had more phones? Republicans or Democrats? Republicans. So the Republicans were answering the phone and oh, honey, somebody's calling. Let's talk to them. You know what I mean? There's this one comedian, he does this show, he goes like, back when we were kids, we were growing up, somebody'd knock on the door and be like, who is it? Let's go greet them at the door. And everybody was excited, right? And now today it's like, somebody's knocking at the door. I wonder who's out there. You know what I mean? Same thing with the phone. You're like, the phone's ringing. It pops up on the TV now. At our house, it does. We get our phone through Cox, so you see who's calling on the TV. Like, I'm not answering. You know what I mean? So, so Republicans were answering the phone in 48, and the polls were all showing Dewey defeating Truman, and the polls were wrong. Okay. So one of the other things that you can, it's not completely random, but CNN does this. Other organizations do this on election day. It's called exit polling. So when people leave after they vote, they're leaving the polls. They'll have surveyors there to ask them who they voted for. Okay, these polls tend to be pretty accurate. Now that's day of the election, so they're trying to get information. But with that exit polling, you can find out some good information as well. Like ask them, what was the biggest issue that caused you to vote for this person? Was it immigration? Was it the economy? These sorts of things. So it kind of gives us insight into who won the election, why they won the election. Does that make sense? So exit polling can be fairly accurate, but if you take an election like 2016, right, where you had two wonderful candidates in Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, right, the polls were so wrong in 2016 because people were afraid to tell pollsters that they were going to vote for Trump. Why were people afraid to do that? Because everybody was calling Trump a what? A racist. And people didn't want to be identified as a racist because they supported Trump, but they liked his message on other things like the economy, taxes, trade, you name it. So people wouldn't answer the poll, or they wouldn't be honest with the pollster. Okay? If it's CNN calling a Republican saying, hey, we're doing a poll. Oh, let's have some fun with CNN right here. Okay. So it's become a very tricky business to do this polling. Okay. Like I said earlier, you have to call so many people. Okay, so CNN doesn't call these people, or Reuters doesn't call these people, or The Economist, they don't call these people. They hire telemarketers to call these people. Okay, you guys want a good paying job? Wichita is one of the largest telemarketing cities in the country. Do you know why they use Wichita, Kansas? We don't have an accent. We're normal. We're not, from Minnesota, okay? We're not from India, okay? We're not from the South, okay? We're normal. So they hire people. You can make like $12 an hour being a telemarketer, okay, in Wichita, Kansas, okay? It's expensive to call that many people, okay? So we've got one of the things we're going to look at is the number of people that are polled as well. Okay, and this is where the statistics part kind of comes in. All right. So here's another factor in a good poll. Okay, it asks a fair and understandable question. Now I know who are you going to vote for in the next. That's pretty fair and pretty easy to understand. Okay, as an experiment, a polling group tried this question on people. They asked people in a poll. They said, does it seem possible or impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? What? Does it seem possible or impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? I know 6% of people responded to that it never happened, which is a pretty high number. Probably because they didn't understand the question. I know, I understand. It's a bad question. Okay, it's a bad poll. So a good poll has an easy to understand question. Okay, and they interpret the responses correctly. Okay. And they report it in an understandable way. Well, let's see how they do this. Now, I want to go back. No. I don't want to go back to hell. 2020 election. Now, RCP is Real Clear Politics. Okay. And this was, these are national polls. So they're not polling a state. These are national polls. Okay. And all of these polls had Biden winning. Okay. Now, battleground states. Let's look at Michigan. Okay. So this was the polling on election day, or the election's November 3rd, I think it was. Okay. So 1,033 likely voters. Okay. Now, obviously, you don't want to poll people that are not registered to vote. Okay. So there's a difference between a registered voter and a likely voter. A likely voter, somebody says, you ask them, you say, have you voted before? Are you likely to vote again in this election? So that improves your poll a little bit. Okay. Now, 1,033, that's a pretty big number. That's a lot of people they had to call. Okay. Now this Trafalgar was good in 2016. Trafalgar's really one of the only two that showed Trump winning in 2016. All the other polls were way off. Okay. Now, depending on what you think happened in Detroit, Michigan, or didn't happen in Detroit, Michigan, okay, would lead you to believe Trafalgar was either right or wrong. Okay. Now, the RCP average was 4.2. The final results was Biden winning by 2.8. Okay. So some of these were pretty far off. Yes. You want to look at another state? You want to look at Kansas? It's not a battleground state. It's not on here. Let's look at Texas. Okay. Now, these polls were, this one, Emerson had a tie. Quinnipiac had a tie. Trump won Texas by 5.8. This New York Times Siena poll was fairly accurate, 4%. Okay. The average of all the polls was 1.3. Okay. What else we got here? Florida. Okay. Look at these polls. CNBC had Biden winning by 3%. Quinnipiac had Biden winning Florida by 5%. Okay. Trump won by 3.3. Trafalgar was the closest. Okay. So let's break down. Let's get into one of these. Let's look at Trafalgar. This was a pretty good poll. It was pretty close to the final result. Okay. So these are all the candidates that people said they were voting for. Okay. Oh, come on. Where's the? You gotta give me more than this. Oh, you're not gonna make me do that. See report here, sorry. Okay. 1,054 respondents, okay? Likely 2020 general election voters. Response rate 1.41%. So in order to get a person to answer, they had to call, what, 99 people or 100 people? They got 1.5 to respond.
It's terrible.
Okay.
Terrible job.
I know. Margin of error. Okay, this is what I need to show you, and you need to write this down. Okay, this is where the math starts to affect me.
What? Write that down?
Yeah,
Why?
because you need to answer this on the test. Okay, so to figure out your margin of error, how off this number is in either direction, okay, you plug the sample size into this. Okay, somebody got a calculator? There we go, Kelly's getting one. All right, you know how to do this on a calculator? I don't, so you're gonna tell me the answer. Okay, we're gonna plug 500 into this.
.0447.
0.0447.
Yeah, 447.
447. Okay, we're gonna move this over here. Okay, the decimal over here. Your margin of error is plus or minus 4.47%. So only polling 500 people means that this number could be off in either direction 4.5%. So let's plug in 1,000.
0.0316.
0.0316. 3.1% margin of error. You're getting better. Now, you had to call a heck of a lot more people to get to that 1,000 people polling. Yes? Let's put in 5,000. Which means you're going to have to call like 50,000 people.
0.014.
Okay, which would be 1.4%. So you drop in half the margin of error, okay, by calling 4,000, getting 4,000 more people to answer. You're not going to spend the money on it. Okay, so generally a good poll is going to be around 1,000 people. Okay, and you're hopefully going to get a margin of error somewhere around plus or minus 3%. Okay, what's that? Yeah, that's a pretty good poll. Okay, now, but there's other factors here. About plus or minus 3. Okay. Confidence, this is what they have in their poll. They feel 95% confidence their poll is correct. Okay. Now, here's another problem. How did they get these people, okay, to answer? How much time do I have?
Oh, like a minute.
Okay. Jeez. There you are. Where'd you go? Okay, here's your age. So guys, now we have to factor in this. What percentage of voters are answering this poll of what age? And you guys know some people that are young vote heavily Democrat, some in the median, right? So you got to factor that into the confidence of your poll. What age, the ethnicity, you got to factor that in. What percentage of which ethnic group votes in this party and that party? You got to factor in gender. Okay, they polled more women than men. So is this poll going to favor Biden over Trump? Maybe. Okay. Different districts and so forth. Okay. So all of these factors make it difficult to do a good poll. Okay. 2016, most of them blew it. Okay, 2020, the polls were a little more accurate. They learned, okay? Now, if I do an internet poll, there's no way to know who's seeing the poll. Like, are more Republicans seeing this poll or more Democrats seeing this poll? Are of these people that were polled here, how many of them are Republicans? How many of them are Democrats? How many of them are independents? Okay, so it's not a perfect science. Some of these companies do better than others. Okay, and Rasmussen and Trafalgar have been among the best. Okay, Fox News poll hasn't been very good. CNN poll hasn't been very good. New York Times polls haven't been very good. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about that next week, and then we'll watch some videos and do some stuff. Cool? Yeah, have a good weekend.
Blah.
Do you have a